smartphones, please scan the QR code. This way, when the questions are answered, they will appear on your phone and you have an opportunity to respond based on the candidate's response. Also, we're asking you to mute your cell phones, and we will get started here momentarily. Also, if you're Spanish speaking and you need interpretation, we have Luciana in the back. She has the she will be interpreting for those who speak Spanish. If you need a headset, she has the headsets back there, and she can translate that for you in English. All right, so we're going to get started. So welcome. My name is Leonard Leitner. I'm the municipal administrator. I know most of you here, but some I don't know. Thank you for coming out. I want to introduce the panel and tell you how we got to where we are today. So we're now in what we call our community listening session. We've gotten this far. We started off with 51 applicants. We're now down to 3. We got down to 3 through 2 interview rounds. We started off with the 51. We narrowed them down. When I say we, HR and the administrator, myself, we went through the 51 and pulled those out some that didn't meet the basic qualifications, some that didn't follow the entire process, and we weeded those down and gave council the top 10. Council at that point in time reviewed the top 10, looked at those individuals on the top 10, and then we selected the ones that they wanted to interview. After we looked at the interview, we had a panel set up for the interview process. The interview process was a first panel of 3 chiefs from the Chiefs Association, to also include community members that were part of the panel, as well as the council members. The chiefs that are up here went through a round of interviews with the panel, and these were the top 3 that were selected. So we're at the point now where the community also had a point in time where they were able to send in their questions of what they would like to see in their future chief. This was done at the original onset when we asked the community, what do you want to see in your next Norristown police chief? We got an overwhelming response of people's responses of what they wanted to see in the new chief. We took those questions that they submitted there, and about a month ago, we also put out another survey and asked the residents to send us a response of what questions you would like to ask. This is not going to be a session where the community itself gets to ask the questions. What we did was took all the questions that were submitted to us. We synthesized those questions and put those questions, because a lot of questions were similar questions. We took those questions and we put them into what we call a situational-based questionnaire. So the questions that will be asked today will be a series of most of those questions put together and placed into situational questions. Who I have with us today who's going to moderate this is Dr. Barnett. Dr. Marion Barnett, a little bit about her and why we selected her to moderate this. Dr. Barnett is a professor at Widener University her work centers on policies and community organization across a focus on preparing students and residents and community on social consciousness, general social work, and her work bridges micro and macro practices, emphasizing the critical connection between individual client needs and recognizing and the broader social and policy environment. Her work has been recognized and she has several awards, and she's also been published several times in peer-reviewed articles and journals. Her particular areas such as community development, African American families, and also service and learning and asset mapping. So we asked Dr. Barnett to participate in this because she does well at moderating and she has experience in social justice, community organizing. Here's the fans. Hopefully that works. So we might have to talk a little louder. So Dr. Barnett is going to moderate this. We have this set for about an hour and a half. There's 5 questions. Each candidate will have about 5 minutes to answer each question. At this point in time, I won't introduce them because they will go through and introduce themselves. But at this point in time, I will turn it over to Dr. Barnett.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Leitner. Hey, friends, how are you doing this morning? I know, I'm like, you got to have some energy, okay? What'd you say?
Living the dream.
Living the dream, brother, I'm saying, right? And so thank you so much for joining us today for this important conversation. We have the opportunity to hear directly from our finalists for the position of police chief for Norristown municipality. This town hall is part of our community-centered hiring process. Your presence and input are absolutely essential because we're going to evaluate who will lead your police department into the future. Whether you're joining us in person or virtually, your voice matters. And so we started off with, hey, make sure you scan that QR code up there. And so if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll find a link in the video description that'll take you to the community input form. If you're with us in person, just scan one of the QR codes posted around the room to access the exact same tool. It's quick, anonymous, and helps us ensure that your voices are part of this process. So I'm going to give you a second just for anybody who's just come in to open up the link. Once you're in, you'll be prompted to give your name, and you have to give your name. And 2 quick background questions. Are you a Norristown resident? And what's your street name and your zip code? This will help us understand what parts of the community we're hearing from today. And so you want to make sure that your process is representative. And so that's why we just asked, we don't need the street number, we just need the street name so that we can get a sense of whether or not we're hearing from one part of the community or whether we're hearing from the entire municipality. So we'll pause for a moment so that you can complete that step.
Can't hear her?
Okay, thank you. Your participation is appreciated and will remain confidential. The responses will only be used to support the selection process. So, for our candidates, each candidate will respond to a set of questions developed from feedback submitted by residents, community leaders, and survey participants. These questions reflect the priorities of Norristown: trust, accountability, safety, communication, and inclusion. We're going to ask you all the same question so you can fairly assess the responses and the leadership styles side by side. After each candidate responds, there's going to be a period. So what's going to happen is I'm going to ask a question. Mr. Trail is going to answer the question, and then you'll see something pop up on Slido that says, please rate this question. And then Mr. Benjamin is going to answer the question, the same question, and then a little bit of a pause for you to answer on Slido. And then Mr. Clowser is going to answer a question. You're going to do the same thing. So let's begin. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to go into law enforcement. And then finally, what keeps you motivated to serve today? Mr. Trail.
Well, good morning, and welcome. I'm very thankful to Norristown to be part of this process. I think this is a really important event for your community, and I'm very happy to be here. A little bit about me. I'm currently the Chief of Police for Lansdale Borough. I've been in law enforcement for the better part of about 33 years. I spent a brief period of time in the private sector, but most of my life, from about 20 years old, I've been a police officer. I've worked in various departments, from large agencies in Baltimore, Maryland, the Baltimore Police Department, to small agencies in Western Pennsylvania, and then currently the agency I'm at now. My career and my journey into this profession started when I was a young man. Much like youth today, I definitely had some contact with the police. Not necessarily horribly bad, but contact with the police. And I found one officer of particular, a gentleman from the Township Police Department when I was a young man. We would hang out, we would gather, and the police would come to shoo us away. Most were very heavy-handed, authoritative type individuals, but there was one officer who was really engaged, and he got out of his car and he would talk to us as young men, and he would treat us with respect, and he was the first person to humanize this profession for me, which I think is really important. And that's who I wanted to be. I think like many officers and even my colleagues up here, we came to this profession wanting to help people, wanting to serve people. And that has really been my kind of North Star as I've moved through my career. Had some ups and downs, obviously. There's been challenges to our profession, no doubt, becoming very significant in the past couple of years. And my goal as a police officer was always to do the right thing and serve the community. I worked very hard at that. I worked my way through college to get my master's degree from Tiffin University in Ohio. And as I moved up through my career, I always kept the North Star as trying to do what was right for the community, trying to do what was in the best light for the community, because I understood as a young man, and even throughout my career in different parts of the country, policing is not always the same in every community. We all may hold the same title and we all may have gone to the same academy, but it's applied differently in different locations geographically. It's no different in Norristown. The Norristown Police Department is unique to Norristown. Lansdale Police Department is unique to Lansdale. But we all share a common thread of service. And that is a common thread that we need to keep as our North Star as we move through this challenging profession. There's many issues that are presented with us today that are very difficult, and they're actually outside the scope of policing. The unhoused, the immigration issues, the opioid epidemic, mental health crisis that we're facing in this country. Sadly, that falls on our men and women in law enforcement to tackle every day. So we have to make sure we're giving them the proper training and education. And my North Star is to continue to do that as a leader. I was honored to be selected as Chief of Police in my department in 2017. I've been able to grow the department, or I should say we, as our team, have been able to grow the department. We, much like Norristown at that time, were having significant staffing issues. We didn't have a lieutenant, we lost sergeants, we were down a number of police officers. So we put together a plan to reintegrate the department, rehire quality candidates, good people who would come out and serve our community. We created what I call a brand for our organization, which was service first. And we go out every day and we try and serve the community to the best of our ability. Our motto in the Lansdale Police Department is everything matters. There are no inconsequential details in this profession. It's often in life, and all of you may understand, we always get the big things right, but it's the details that catch us up. So for me, every day is just striving to be as better as we can be as a profession, as an individual. I believe heavily in self-improvement. I took that kind of vein back in 2015. And I've never looked back as trying to better myself. I'm a human, I'm fallible, as all police officers are. But if we can recognize that and understand that our true strength lies in our ability to learn from our mistakes, apply the lessons learned and move forward, we can together accomplish any task. And it has to be together. We have to work together as a community, a police department, and appointing authority to get it right. If I were to become selected as your chief, first thing I would do is engage in a community survey, much like what's happened here today, to try and get a pulse on what's going on in the community. From that survey, develop a plan of action that's applicable to this community, acceptable to this community, and realistic for the men and women to carry out. And once we do that, we'll be able to move forward. What keeps me whole and what keeps me driving every day is just the great work the men and women of this profession do. I'm a father of a police officer now, and I know that we do make mistakes. I understand that. My son calls me every time he makes a mistake and says, "Hey, Dad, what did I do wrong here?" I got to be dad and chief at the same time. But helping my men and women go out and serve the community and hearing the feedback from the men and women in the community is really important.
Thank you so much. Now, the first question on Slido has popped up. Please answer that question. I'm sorry, the introduction question does not have a Slido. My apologies. I'm so sorry, Mr. Benjamin. No, you can just start.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the esteemed leadership of the borough to give us this opportunity to sit before you, the residents of Norristown. My name is Mark Jeffrey Maurice Benjamin Sr. I'm born and raised here in Atlanta. I'm just retired 2 months ago. So I'm born and raised here in Norristown, Pennsylvania. I graduated from Norristown Area High School. Growing up, the value of Norristown was family. Family first, family above everything. That's how we kept our community together. The church was a big part of our community. We decided in Norristown at that time, I'm a product of a single mother who raised me as a man to say, if you do the crime, you do the time. You stand on what you say, you mean what you say, and you deliver the promise that you made. So with that being said, at 17 years old, I went into the United States Air Force after having a long conversation with my mother where she said, you know, son, I'm not going to be here forever. That was like a wake-up moment for me. My mother was my everything. My family was my everything. So at that point, I decided I wasn't ready to go to college. I wasn't going to waste my mother's money because we were already, living paycheck to paycheck and living hard. So I chose to go to the Air Force. I became what's called a security policeman in the Air Force, which digressed into the question, what made me want to get in law enforcement? This is a family joke that we have, 1 Adam 12. I used to sit in front of the TV every day watching 1 Adam 12, and I said, I'm going to be that. I'm going to help people. I'm going to serve my community. So I started in the Air Force. I became a security police officer. I rose to the rank of sergeant. I served during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. After Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I got out. I became a law enforcement officer in the city of Atlantic City, where I served for 27 years. I rose through the ranks to become a captain of police. I became the commander of the Uniform Patrol Division Bravo shift, which was the 4 to 12 shift, which many of you might not know, but in Atlantic City during the summer season, we swelled to 1 million visitors a day. So I had the busiest shift. I served the community there as if they were my family here, even though most of them weren't, but I still had family there due to familial ties. I chose Atlantic City because I couldn't get hired here in Norristown. So when I served in Atlantic City, I became credentialed as a law enforcement through the state of New Jersey. As most of you might not know, New Jersey just transitioned into licensing their police officers. Doctors have licenses, lawyers have licenses, and the state of New Jersey determined it was time for law enforcement to be licensed, given the state of affairs in America today. I love teaching. I bring passion, I bring intensity, and I don't apologize for it. Because in this profession, we can't afford to make mistakes. And we must have accountability. As we see all over the world, that's a big issue, accountability in law enforcement. I'm a proponent of civilian review boards. I'm a proponent of the body-worn camera. And I'm a bigger proponent of mentorship. The young law enforcement officers coming into the career field and the young people in the community. That's my passion. I have a nonprofit organization where I mentor young people with the help of Derek Jeter, baseball superstar, and Benaja Laney with the WNBA. They got me up off the ground in 2020, and I've been running since. I've been mentoring young people. My board members are members of here in Norristown's community because my vision was broad. Even at the start, I want to bring 2 states together, intermingle the young people together, and prepare them to be lifelong learners and critical thinkers. I was also a member of the school board of Winslow Township because I'm very involved in my community. I was elected official. I was the contract negotiation chair in Winslow Township. And I'm here to serve. I'm retired, and I have nothing but time on my hands. And what better place to seed the ground than here where I was raised and bring my values, Norristown's values, back to Norristown. Service above all things, just like the chief said. It's service above all things. To whom much is given, much is required. We have the power to take your liberties. We must be right if we do or rise to that level. And we have to look at it from an economic standpoint, because if we do it wrong, it becomes a risk management issue, and Norristown taxpayer has to foot the bill.
Thank you. Mr. Clowser.
All right, thank you and good morning. Thank you for coming out. My name is Richard Clowser. Some of you may recognize me because I was the Deputy Chief of Police of Norristown a few years back. I wasn't born here, but I adopted Norristown as my home back in 1993 when I started my career in policing as a Norristown police officer. I rose through the ranks. I had great opportunities while I was here to be in K-9, to be on the SWAT team, to be the SWAT commander eventually, then when Chief Talbot came in 2013, he chose me as his deputy chief. And I spent 8 years under his guidance. So, you know, I've seen some times when Norristown wasn't so safe. I've seen times when it was safer than it is now. You know, and I know what works for Norristown. You know, growing up, you know, why did I get into this profession? I grew up in Pottstown. My parents had a sandwich shop, and the officers used to come in there and eat, and I used to kind of get to know them. You know, again, humanizing them, right? We have to eat too, we take breaks. And, you know, that grew my desire to be a police officer. So I went into the Pottstown Law Enforcement Explorers as a 14-year-old. And then shortly after that, similar to Mr. Benjamin, I chose the military. I chose the military over college, you know, because we didn't want to put a burden on our parents. And so I went into the Army as a military policeman. I spent 3 years on active duty. I got to see the world. I said, you know what, it's time for me to get out and actually be a police officer. And I first started getting my education. Unfortunately, that got disrupted because I didn't leave the Army. I went into the Army Reserves. And so I got deployed, Desert Storm, spent some time in Desert Storm, came back, didn't really go back to college, decided I was going to put myself through the academy. Around that same time, Norristown was hiring. I was drawn to Norristown. There's so much to do here. It's the only place in the area where you actually do real police work and you get to serve people that need us. And that, you know, so I started my career here in 1993 as a young police officer. And again, you know, I've seen the bad times in Norristown. I've seen immigration issues in Norristown. I've seen neighborhoods transition from one culture to another. I've seen the West End grow. You know, I've been part of that. And I enjoyed that. I had a passion to serve Norristown. I was out in some of these streets that people have lived here all their life, have never been on at 3 o'clock in the morning, solving a problem in Norristown. Somebody who was in critical need. So, you know, I have a passion to come back and do that again. You know, currently I'm chief of police in New Britain Township. You know, I left in 2021 to be a chief there because there was an opportunity, it was a career opportunity for me. I had a guaranteed chief position. You know, it wasn't guaranteed that I would be the chief here. Now I'm back. I see that there's things to do. There's things that I know how to do for Norristown. My leadership not only, you know, stems from being a police officer and being mentored by some great, you know, supervisors and leaders, but I spent 34 years in the Army Reserve as well. I didn't quit that until 2021 when I became a chief. I rose to the rank of Command Sergeant Major after 17 years, and I held that rank for another 17 years. the highest rank, the non-commissioned rank that you can have in the military as a non-commissioned officer. You know, and so I have a lot of leadership experience from there too. There's a lot of things I learned. And when I went on deployments from Norristown and came back, you know, I realized that there was things that we had to do differently, you know, and I imposed some of those changes on there. So, you know, I have a passion to continue to serve this great community. And right now, it needs a leader. It needs somebody who can give structure. It needs somebody who knows the department and knows the community. And I can tell you, I am that person, right? I've proven that I can do this job. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to get into it. We are going to make some adjustments in time, just so that you're not sitting here still at 4 o'clock in the afternoon as we answer questions. We want to give them appropriate time, and so 3 minutes, Mr. Leitner, is that fine to answer each question? And so remember, this is where the fun begins with Slido, so if you haven't scanned the QR codes, please make sure that you sign in, use your name and your street address, your street name, and your zip code. Our first question, can you describe a time when you were assigned a community with low trust in the police? Can you describe a time when you were assigned a community with low trust in the police? What steps did you take to build relationships and improve trust? And what were the results?
Thank you for the question. So as I told you previously, I spent some time in the Baltimore Police Department in Baltimore, Maryland. And I think everyone in the room has understood, if you know anything about Maryland, there's been some challenges in the Baltimore Police Department. They were there when I was a police officer there in 1997. And I was assigned to the Eastern District. I spent some time in patrol. And within about a year, I got the opportunity to go to a community engagement assignment. And that was a foot beat in the 2100 to the 2500 blocks of East Monument Street in East Baltimore. And that's a business district. It's just a little bit south of Johns Hopkins, or straight out east of Johns Hopkins Hospital. It's where the Northeast Market is, if you're familiar with Baltimore. And my role and my job as a community engagement officer was to go out into the community and build trust and build engagements. I quickly learned that the place to get all the information in some communities is the corner. And we had issues on our corner that were of crime. And that's where I started building relationships with people on the corner, trying to understand the community that I was now a part of. And it was a learning experience for me because it was a different culture than I ever experienced. And one of the things that was very clear to me, and one of my FTOs initially told me, is never forget that the people let us police their community. It's only through their trust and support that we can do our job. You know, that never really crystallized in my mind until the events after Freddie Gray and the riots in Baltimore. We need community trust and support. Every single one of your officers in this Norristown Police Department should be positively engaged in the community. They should know their people on their post, good and bad. Majority of the residents in Norristown are great people who want the same thing that all of us want: safe streets, good schools, and a place where their kids can go out and play in the evening and not be fearful of being victimized by crime or being abused by the police. So I learned that early on, and that is my guiding light in that sense of community engagement, is doing that. And I worked very hard to build trust. And that means subverting your ego. That means accepting things that are different than what you may or may not have known in your life. And realizing at the end of the day, as I said previously, we all want the same thing. We all start in different places in life. I've been blessed by this career, and I have an obligation to give back. And that's why I'm here, because I believe Norristown has a need for a strong leader. I believe in my 8 years as chief of Lansdale, I've been able to demonstrate that. But I know the cost of not doing it. I value the understanding that if we do not engage our community, we can't work together to solve problems. And there was a guy, I don't know what his name, but there was a council meeting recently where someone talked about this SRC project. I don't know the gentleman's name, but he was spot on. He was spot on how we need to mentor, lead, and give our children, our youth, opportunities.
Thank you. Now take 20 seconds to answer the question on Slido. Mr. Benjamin.
Well, I have experience in this area as the Bravo platoon commander. Well, before I became a commander, I was a juvenile detective, and I became a school resource officer. And in Atlantic City, we had a rash of shootings. Can everybody hear? We had a rash of shootings, and I was tasked with, as a juvenile school resource officer and then a juvenile detective, which was engaging the public. I had to formulate a plan where we had to go out into the community. So what I did was, I made it known to the chief at the time. I said, Chief, we have to be strategic. These young people are looking up to the element that is not legitimate in this community, but they're looking up to the drug dealer. They're looking up to the pusher. They're looking up to the gentlemen that are getting involved in domestic violence on a regular basis. I said, we need to make a conscious effort to go after these children. We have to turn their mindset. So what I did was, I began to go to civic association meetings and because the public wasn't educated in what we were doing. And it was an anti-police sentiment in the city because all they saw was police acting like an occupying force, coming in and extracting the bad people. But in extracting the bad people, there was those encounters that spun off the rails, and civilians that weren't involved in the issue were being arrested for disorderly conduct, and so on and so forth, because we weren't going out and expressing to them why we did what we did. If we had to make a dynamic entry into a house, why we knocked the doors off, why we had to go, it was no follow-up. So I determined, sitting down with Chief Henry White at the time, that one, I will make a conscious effort to go to every civic association meeting, every council meeting, and I will give out my cell phone number. Right there, like we are live now, I gave out my cell phone number, and I told the residents, especially the seniors, because the seniors are the ones that were homeowners and embedded in the community. If you don't see a police officer in 1 hour, you call my cell phone. Because this is what we get paid to do. Don't feel offended. Don't get scared. You call my cell phone, and I will ensure that you will see an officer every hour for the 8-hour shift we were there. So, and one thing we had to do was show cultural competency. We had to understand what the culture was in the neighborhoods. It was segregated neighborhoods, especially in Atlantic City. You had black, you had Italian, you had Hispanic, and then you had the Irish and German. You had to learn who you were serving. And the only way you do that is frequency builds trust, while distance breeds fear and mistrust.
Thank you. Please respond to the question on Slido. Mr. Clowser.
All right. Obviously, having worked in Norristown for as many years as I did, and the last few years as a deputy chief, we understand the importance of trust. Right? 85% of our crimes are solved by people telling us what happened, giving us information. So we have to build that trust with the community. And some of the things as deputy chief that I've done in Norristown are bring certain programs to help the officers build trust, build relationships with the department. Coffee with a Cop, right? That was under my guidance as deputy chief. We grew Coffee with a Cop to Water Ice with a Cop because we wanted to connect with the kids in Norristown. And we'd go to different blocks and have Water Ice with a Cop. We still do those, Norristown still does those things today. We need to make sure that the community comes out, right? It's your community. You have to trust us, right? We're the legitimate organization for law enforcement to provide safety for the community. So continuing to build trust. Another program that I had was TAPS, Teen and Police Services Academy for youth. We went into Norristown High School and we got some of the at-risk youth and formed relationships with police officers from Norristown. And so we would, each week, we'd have a different topic we talk about. And one of the things that, I know Mark's from Norristown and he grew up as a single family. One of the things that impacted me the most when I was on the streets in Norristown was going to those houses of those single parents, seeing how those kids lived. And a lot of those kids didn't eat meals as a family. They ate what was ever there. Well, when we did TAPS, that was probably one of the greatest parts of TAPS was we provided like a snack or food. One time we got Chick-fil-A, and so we used, it sounds like we use food to build trust. Well, yeah, we do, right? Coffee with a cup and this other things. The other thing is with the Hispanic community, right? We had to go out of our way to make sure that we were doing what we needed for the Hispanic community to trust us, right? Because of immigration issues. And so we hired a community liaison who's sitting in the audience to help us build trust with the Hispanic community. So it's an ongoing thing because you want the public to have trust when the bad things happen so that they trust the police department.
Thank you. For our next question, please share an example of when you addressed quality of life concerns in a neighborhood, such as speeding, homelessness, or police presence. How did you respond to community feedback, and what were the outcomes? Andrea?
Thank you. So throughout my career in different locations, we've had several issues to address. Like I said, back in Baltimore, one of was going to the corners to build trust, getting out there and engaging in conversations, sometimes difficult conversations. As chief of police, Lansdale is not unlike Norristown. We're a small borough. Our population density is about 7,500 per square mile, 20,000 people, and about 2.6 square miles. Homelessness, drug use, violent crime did plague our community for a period of time. We've been able to work through that. But one of the things that I'm most proud of that we've been able to do in our community is around the areas of mental health and the unhoused. Back in 2020, right after the pandemic, we started receiving more and more complaints about unhoused individuals sleeping in our train stations, in our parks. And in order to get a handle on that, I actually asked one of our community service officers. We have a community service unit. We have officers who are dedicated to community service and community engagement. And we just wanted to go out and do an informal survey to figure out how many people are really unhoused in our community. We found out that we had about 12 to 13 chronically unhoused. We started to work with local groups on resources, drug and alcohol, mental health coordinators, Your Way Home, different community programs to help folks who are unhoused. Unfortunately, sadly, that has grown. And when that grew to a period that we needed more support and more of a wraparound, we created the Lansdale Hub, or the North Penn Hub. So each month we have a multidisciplinary panel that comes together. It's police departments in the North Penn area, it's mental health, it's judges, it's prosecutors, it's public defenders who come together at a monthly meeting, and we have cases that we talk about. Chronic individuals who aren't falling under the purview of law enforcement, when law enforcement really can't help what their issue is. It's drug and alcohol, it's mental health, it's a lack of resources. So The hub grew over a number of years, and then in 2022, we wrote a grant for Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, a PCCD grant, for $135,000 to start a mental health co-responder program in Lansdale. And I'm happy to report that we got the grant. That program went live in 2023 within our organization, and it has paid dividends to my community. It was finding the right person for the job, and we did a really good job on our RFP. And what has been really most astonishing is how our police officers have engaged the co-responder and utilized the co-responder most often to de-escalate situations. Believe it or not, folks, cops don't want to come to work every day and fight with people and roll around on the ground. That's not what we want to do. We want to achieve our operational objective, keep the community safe, and fulfill our mission. And our co-responder program has helped us build trust.
Thank you. Please rate the response on Slido. Mr. Benjamin.
Okay, I'm going to talk about police presence. It was an initiative after the mayor and the residents in the city began to complain about the center of the city, Atlantic Avenue. The mayor came out and met the Philadelphia Inquirer reporter and took her on a walk through that specific area. And you would see addicts out there. You know, we had an open air drug market out there. So I was selected by the chief of police to put together a task force to initiate an initiative to clean up that area. It was from Tennessee Avenue to Ohio Avenue. It was 24-hour open air drug market. We even had gun violence. So what I did was I took the initiative to formulate a team of veteran officers, undercover narcotics officers, and young officers. So we can train them at the same time we're doing this initiative. We can train them and mentor them on how we need to be. So I utilize canine dogs, not the patrol canine dog, but we use narcotic dogs, explosive dogs, because you know with drugs comes gun violence. The explosive dog can sniff out the gunpowder. The narcotics dog can sniff out the drugs. So what we did was, putting that team together, we looked at the data of when we were seeing the most spikes in the sales of the narcotics. And then you have the residents who couldn't go to the convenience store. They're walking in and they're being stopped saying, yo, I got this package. Can you buy this? You want this? You want that? So they stopped going. So now the merchant was affected. His bottom line is going down. They come to city council. They begin to express displeasure in the services that they were being rendered. So when we put this task force together for like 3 or 4 months, we hit it hard. We were very aggressive at it, and we literally stopped it. Literally stopped it. The mayor did the follow-up report. The area was clean. This is what we have to do, but at the same time, when we caught juveniles who were being used by adults to peddle their drugs, we took them in and we put them on a station house adjustment program where we got permission from the Juvenile Justice Commission to put them in the Police Explorers program so we can mentor them, get them exposed to what we do. We started a juvenile police academy. So they know what we did, they hear the radio calls, they did all of that. Because my philosophy is, if you change the mindset, you gain a child, you gain a family, you restore a community. And I would beat that home. And when I was in undercover narcotics, buying drugs, buying guns, I had the same philosophy. One of the largest operations in Atlantic City was called Operation Restore Hope. I was a deacon in the church at the time. They came to me and says, what can we name this initiative? And I said, Operation Restore Hope, so parents can let their kids go out on the playground and not find heroin bags and needles where they're supposed to be playing at.
Thank you. Please rate your response. Mr. Clowser.
So as deputy chief here in Norristown, we obviously had a lot of quality of life issues to address. And we took that and developed, a strategy on how we were going to address quality of life issues. Number one is, what do you want your community to look like? Some certain parts of the community in Norristown, because it's a very diverse community, want different things. Their safety is looked at differently. And we need to understand that as the police department. What do you want your community to look like? Obviously, we're going to make it as safe as we possibly can, but we can't be there all the time, so we want to empower the community to do what they have to do. Again, we have to build trust, right? There has to be that trust to do that. So some of the things we did in Norristown, under our strategic vision, and specifically dealing with quality of life issues, is we had geographic commanders, right? So hopefully we still have this in Norristown. The municipality is divided into 4 different regions. There's a supervisor that heads that region and addresses the issues in that region and reports back to the chief of police on what they're doing to address quality of life issues. So we're putting leadership on top of it. Then we're empowering the officers, right? We're doing directed patrols to find out, engaging with the community, find out what the problem is so we can solve the problem in that particular block or that particular part of the community. We also are giving the officers a framework to operate under, right? Least harm means of enforcement. We don't want to over-police something, okay? We don't want to go out and arrest everybody. That's not going to solve the problem. So we use least harm means of enforcement where, hey, if we can get by with changing your behavior by having a discussion, we're going to do that. If we can, there's going to be people that we're going to have to arrest. But if we can, change your behavior in some way and the least amount of harm to you, that's what we want to do. So addressing quality of life issues, it's different for every neighborhood you go to, right? There could be homeless down on Main Street, but they're not, on the 1000 block of Willow Street. So it's a different issue for different neighborhoods. And we have to understand, what does that neighborhood need from us? And what can we provide to them in order to make that part of the community safer? So, we give directions to the officers on how to address quality of life issues. And we bring in additional resources, right? Those service agencies who all live here in Norristown, right, work here in Norristown, we bring them in to help us. We don't just do it ourselves, right? It's a community, so we need to do it together.
Thank you. Please indicate your response. Next question. Tell us about a time when your department faced public distrust, perhaps after a controversial incident. How did you engage with the community to rebuild trust, and what was the result?
Thank you. We've had a few issues and challenges in our community. One of them being our drug epidemic that created a lot of problems in Lansdale. Back in late 2010, we had a very severe drug problem in Lansdale. Opioids were starting to get in the scene, but it was really just crack, which unfortunately was in some of our lower socioeconomic areas in the community. And much like Mark and Rich have said, we have to, in these times, sometimes law enforcement has to take law enforcement action. And we actually engaged in a very aggressive campaign to target people who were selling drugs in Lansdale. And one of the problems with taking affirmative enforcement action is it erodes trust, because we have to do things that the community may not understand and understand why we're doing certain things. When we have to execute search warrants, or we have to go take really bad people out of the community, it's not pretty. And in this one situation, we executed a search warrant in a house, and it was the wrong address. and mistakes happen. We assisted a law enforcement partner in executing that search warrant. We took down the wrong door to the wrong house, and I was a supervisor on scene. We thought we had all of our ducks in a row. Unfortunately, it came down to one little tiny error, which was the picture, which goes back to my point about everything matters. And we had to work significantly to rebuild trust in that community, not only with that individual family, but with the neighborhood. Because now what we were seen as is an occupying force. We were seen as coming into the community and just being heavy-handed in our police tactics and using force and search warrants to disrupt the community. When in fact, what we were trying to do was use our tools to protect the community from people who would do them harm. And that's just one example of things that I personally worked on. But trust is constantly eroding. Trust is constantly having to be maintained. A lot of departments will engage in activities, and we engage in the coffees with the cops and all those things, and they're very important. But there has to be consistency, and there has to be transparency. You can't fake it to make it. Your men and women need to be out there every day in a positive light in their community. They're going to make mistakes. But if we train them right, and we mentor them, and we give them the proper tools, time, and support to go out and do the job, they'll get it right. But your feedback's incredible. Your feedback is really important, and we need that. That's why a community survey from the day I take office, if I were to be hired, is priority number one. What are the issues in the different respective wards? I know there's 4 zones, there's 7 wards and whatnot politically. They all have different needs. They all have different things that need to be addressed. And if we don't have a roadmap and understand what the needs are in a particular area, we're flying blind.
Thank you. Please indicate your response. We're about at the halfway mark. If you want to just stand up and let the blood flow to your feet again, please feel free to take a second to do that. I know after a little bit, you kind of get a little cramped in. So, please.
Is there time for a bathroom break? Yeah, right? I left my phone outside. I inevitably.
Mine's been ringing. I got to keep shaking it off.
All right, friends, let's resume. Is everyone ready? Hey, friends. We're still in the middle. Have a seat. Have a seat, everybody.
Hello, everyone. We're going to get started again. Hello.
All right.
Let's start.
All right, we're going to get started again. Describe a situation where you had to respond to an incident involving racial or cultural tensions in the community. Where was it? Oh. I'm so sorry, Mr. Benjamin. I just jumped on in there. My apologies. I guess my body said stand up, and I didn't even think about it. I didn't even let you finish it. So please respond to the question. Thank you so much. And so, yeah. Yes. And so, tell us a time when your department faced public distrust, perhaps after a controversial incident. How did you engage with the community to rebuild trust, and what was the result? Thank you.
Okay, well, it was several incidents that were officer-involved shootings. And of course, the officer-involved shootings were in the low-income neighborhoods or moderate to low-income neighborhoods. And the police and the community were already in a distrust situation given the daily activity of officers and engagement in the community. But when we had the officer-involved shootings, we had to take a more direct and intentional approach of engagement because the sentiment was every officer was gun happy and would do that. So what we had to do was dispel that sentiment by presence. Let the community know we put on our pants the same way. We bleed the same way. We don't come to work with the intention on engaging anybody and taking their life. We pray that it never happens. But in a sense, when it does happen, we have to be transparent. And transparent doesn't mean releasing every detail to the public. Transparency is forming a trusting bond with the community through continuous engagement, continuous presence, and training of the officer. And at some point, the officer has to build a relationship with the community themselves. So if it does happen, somebody in that community can say, wait a minute, not Officer Johns. We know Officer Johns. We'll leave our children in the presence of Officer Johns. Officer Johns comes to the cookout with us, so we know what his philosophy is. Something had to happen for it to get to that point. So then what we did was public service announcements, and we began to educate the public on the use of force continuum. We don't just go for guns. It's certain things that have to happen, and the officer believes their life is in danger or protecting the life of another. So we began to educate the public in that, and you could see where the light bulb will go off on a few, but we all know America is polarized. You either love the police or you either hate the police, and there's very little in the middle. But when you go and get the clergy, the academia, and everybody to come in and educate the public on what we're supposed to do, and we stand there with these organizations and say, yes, this is what we do. And we'll put it on Facebook. We'll post what we do. Then you have that sentiment of, okay, let's investigate. Let's find out what happened. Let's just not jump to the conclusion of the officer was wrong or heavy-handed. Let's give him the opportunity to express what happened. And always, situations like that, I've learned, and I'm a proponent of, let an independent investigator come in. Nobody from the department. Independent, the DA's office, Attorney General's office. Let them investigate, because the public is more apt to believe an independent investigator than somebody within an organization that they already mistrust.
Mr. Clowser.
So, as it's been stated before, we need to have that trust bank built before those bad things happen, right? We talked about how to build that trust and the necessary things. I could tell you, yeah, we had some bad incidents happen in Norristown, some use of force incidents, during my tenure as deputy chief. And I don't feel we really experienced a backlash from the community. There were certain people that obviously were upset with how something was handled, and they had every right to be. We took the necessary steps to investigate whatever we needed to investigate, correct whatever actions we needed to correct. But we had people that backed us, right? We had members of the NAACP. We had members from Oklahoma. We had members from the clergy that would stand behind us, because we built those relationships with them. We built trust with them. And so we didn't really have an issue with backlash, I don't feel. And some of you could correct me if I'm wrong, but we always were very transparent about how we did things, as transparent as we possibly could. And also, we had the relationships with those key stakeholders that were there to help us, if something happened. And I could talk about, the protests after George Floyd. We had protests out here. We had peaceful protests, I should say, right? Peaceful protests, because we reached out to the coordinators of those protests beforehand and said, okay, we're going to facilitate whatever you want to do within reason. And we came to an agreement of what we were going to do, how they were going to march, where they were going to protest. And so they had the opportunity to voice their opinions on things, to voice their concerns, and people would listen. And I can tell you, I was there, right? I was there during those peaceful protests, and I actually marched with the protesters, right? I led with them, you know, then there was reasons behind that. You know, there was reasons not only, you know, to kind of build trust and say, hey, we understand what happened was bad. It made us all look bad. We were not happy about it, okay? And we wanted to show our support for what their cause was. So I marched with them. I kneeled with them at Main and Arch Street, you know. So we did that. We did that as a form of building trust and trying to fix Norristown, you know, make sure what happened nationally didn't happen here in Norristown. And I tell you, we were pretty successful in that. We didn't have the bad things happen. And that comes from training your officers as well. We had the trust behind us from the stakeholders, from those people that stood behind us whenever we needed them. And I thank you all for that.
Thank you. Please indicate your response. Next question. Describe a situation where you had to respond to an incident involving a racial or cultural tension in the community. How did you ensure the response was fair, culturally sensitive, and effective? Mr. Trey.
So Lansdale Borough is very culturally diverse. We have a large Bengali population. We have 2 mosques in Lansdale Borough. They're both situated in neighborhoods. And throughout the years, there has been challenges, usually on Fridays, which is the day of prayer for the Muslim faith, and parking became a serious issue. And I understand that that may seem less significant to some, but over a period of time, it really bred a lot of mistrust and anger and resentment towards not only the mosque, but the police department, that we weren't doing what we were supposed to do. And much like my time when I was, in inner city Baltimore on the corner learning in that community, I realized the only way for me to understand what's going on with the mosque was to go to the mosque. So I participated in Friday prayer. I met with the senior elders, the imams of the mosque, and tried to convey to them what was important to the community about maintaining a relationship. And I met with the community members, and we had a meeting session together with members of the mosque and members of the community about how best to address this issue with parking on Fridays. Shared parking was one of the things that we came up with. We worked together with local businesses and different merchants in the area to make sure that on Fridays this did not become a major issue within our community. Other examples are going back to a lot of the unhoused situations we're dealing with right now in Lansdale. The unhoused has become a very challenging issue, and I know there's an issue down here in Norristown. And we have residents in our community who are vocally advocates for supporting the unhoused at any cost, giving them tents, giving them all the resources they need to maintain and sustain life in our parks, which is where we have a large encampment right now, and a large group of residents who are very diametrically opposed to it. We purchased a $500,000 townhouse across from one of our parks, and they're in fear of walking in there because they're unhoused individuals who are engaging in drug activity and a lot of other issues. Just last week, as a matter of fact, one of the individuals living in the park decided he wanted to cut down about $40,000 in trees to make a shelter. That did not go over too well with residents in the community. So we've battled different issues, but again, it all comes back to creating trust. It comes back to relationship building. Relationship building has to occur before the critical incident. The day of the critical incident is not the time to pick up a phone and start meeting somebody. If I were to be hired as chief, all the community members, all the stakeholders who are key stakeholders who want to be engaged in making Norristown a better place to live, work, and play, you're going to have my cell number. And God forbid when that critical incident happens, it's not going to be calling me to say, hey, I'm such and such from this group and we need to talk. It's going to be, hey, Mike, we have this problem. Can we talk? Because that's the way I approach it, and it has to be maintained. The biggest issue we have, unfortunately, in law enforcement is we have these critical incidents where public trust is eroded. We get together for a couple days, we talk about the problem, and we make pledges to continue working together, and then within 2 years, no one's talking to each other. That has to stop. We have to break that cycle in order to effectively give public safety services to this community.
Thank you. Please indicate your response on Slido. Mr. Benjamin.
Okay, this question hits home for me. This is one of those situations where I witnessed myself as a law enforcement officer. I had just become a sergeant of police, and I was on the midnight patrol unit as a district sergeant. And many people believe because you have a big white, black and white vehicle that you can't creep up on them. But this particular situation, I had two officers on a motor vehicle stop. I had two officers on a motor vehicle stop that were Caucasian officers. Stopped a young black man and began to use the N-word. They didn't even see me. So I got out the car, I walked over to them. Now you imagine, once they see me, now it's on. Yeah, it is on. Because you just ruined this whole traffic stop that you may have had. And I chose to use it as a training situation, but I still reported it to Internal Affairs. I said, because that could have been my daughter, my son, my brother, my uncle. I said, if you're going to work in this police department, you're going to learn cultural competence. Come to find out, he was from an area in New Jersey where there wasn't many other cultures, and he was affluent. So everybody, command level was like, you sure you want to do this? I said, no, I'm not sure. I'm positive. This is not going to happen, not on my watch. And now I'm handing it over to you all who are above me, and it's your responsibility to handle it. So this is the question that really hits home for me. This is why we must have a relationship with the community that we serve. Because if situations come in like that, and it wasn't on body camera, because it would have been caught on body camera, but I witnessed myself as a supervisor, and I wrote it up. Those individuals were moved off of my shift. That was the level of discipline, which was discouraging to me. And it was at that point that I said, you know what? We need a cultural shift. So I went to the chief myself. I said, Chief, you got open door policy, I'm using it. We need a cultural shift. I said, because somebody is going to get hurt. Because these young people, with officers like that, are going to believe those officers are going to come with bad intentions. And we're already dealing with young people that have a philosophy, I'd rather be caught with a gun than without a gun. We don't need an officer-involved funeral, and we don't need another officer-involved shooting. Let's stamp this out internally. Let's identify it, let's stamp it out. The result was they were moved off of my shift, and I wasn't told the discipline that was issued to them, which I should have been through the internal affairs process, but I kept my eye on them from here on out. So.
Thank you. Please indicate your response. Mr. Clowser.
Obviously, I'm not a person of color, but throughout my career here in Norristown, I've seen people of color be treated unfairly. I've witnessed it myself, and it was very uncomfortable for me, especially as a young officer, being in the military. I mean, some of my best friends, in the foxhole next to me, who I depended on for my life, were persons of color. And I can tell, well, that's probably for a different time. I can remember when I was in basic training in Aston, Alabama, and we couldn't go into a restaurant because my friend couldn't go in with us. So I understand how important it is to be treated fairly. And one of the things as deputy chief that we ensured was we had procedural justice interwoven into everything that we did. So what is that? Well, it's listening to what the person has to say, right? Explaining to them what we're going to do, giving them equity, right? On how fairness, on how we're going to treat them, and then leaving them with their dignity. The last thing you want to do is take away somebody's dignity. So That's the expectation for the Norristown police officers, is that they are treating everybody procedurally just. And when they're not, that's probably one of the biggest things that can get them in trouble. It's not showing up late for work or whatever. It's that we took seriously. Like, when we got a complaint about it, we took it seriously, we looked into it, and we fixed it. We did training. Again, we built collaboration with, our stakeholders. We met with the NAACP and said, okay, how do we get complaints? How do we get legitimate complaints, so that we can address them? Make sure that they were the conduit to get those complaints to us so that we could look into them. And again, having that trust is key. And as I said before, we did that. We did that when I was here as deputy chief. And I'll do it again. We will make sure that the community trusts us to do what we have to do. And we're going to use procedural justice as that framework. We're going to have that interwoven again into everything that we do. Even how we treat each other inside the department, it was an expectation that you will treat the officers that you work with procedurally just. You will treat the community procedurally just. We emphasize that day in and day out. And it was communicated over and over again until it was ingrained in the officers' heads.
Thank you. Please indicate your response on Slido. Our next question is about ensuring officer accountability. Can you give an example of when an officer under your command was involved in serious misconduct or a complaint? What actions did you take to ensure accountability, and what was the outcome? Mr. Trail.
So shortly after becoming chief of police, I told you earlier, we were at a severe staffing crisis in Lansdale Borough. We were down from 25 to about 19, which for our community is a lot. We had some officers at the time who were working in a part-time basis. We had about half a dozen of them or so. And one of those officers wanted to apply for a full-time position with our department. And I had met with the officer, who was a nice young man, and related to him that, there wouldn't be any shortcuts because he'd always work in a part-time, because the full-time process had to go through civil service. One of the complaints that arose, I should say, one of the issues that arose during his background investigation was related to use of the MDT, or mobile data terminal, in his vehicle. And as is the practice, a lot of officers have the ability to run various people, tags, vehicles, at will. And there was a confidential statement made during the background investigation that this particular officer was using this system to, for all intents and purposes, try and find women. And we were able to determine through an investigation that his queries of people didn't fit his calls for service. So if he was on duty and he had 5 calls for service, but he was running 15 or 20 people a night, he or she, I should say, running 15 or 20 people a night, it didn't add up. And then when we looked at the people who were getting running, there was a pattern of who that was. They were usually single females, young. And we confronted this individual with this information, and when I learned of it, I held a very brief meeting with my command staff, and I said, first, this individual is out of our testing process. He will no longer be in the process to be a Lansdale police officer. And second, this person will no longer be a Lansdale police officer. So by the end of the day, I want his resignation on my desk. And by the end of the day, the resignation was on my desk. You cannot tolerate people who do bad things. And I've said this time again, and I say it in processes that I've been in. Our job in recruiting is to hire, train, and retain only the best people. Not the best cops, not the people who are going to make the fit of the most athletic, the strongest, all that. We need people who are genuinely good people. A lot of the activities men and women do in this profession, they're not having a supervisor over their shoulder. Your men and women are out there in the community doing things on their own, and they have a broad amount of discretion. If we don't train them right and hold them accountable through transparency, body-worn cameras, our early warning systems, and our databases determine use of force, if we're not doing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, throughout our organization, we're not doing our proper service to the community. So early warning on use of force, monitoring our officers' behavior to make sure they're not engaging in nefarious or unlawful activities is priority one for any chief coming here in Norristown.
Thank you. Please indicate your response. Mr. Benjamin.
I can remember one situation where I had to actually have an officer discharged from duty. It wasn't one, it was several, but this case in particular stands out because the individual was identified by other shift commanders before they came to me. So naturally, I find a strong supervisor to put over top of them. And the behavior from where he was continued. But my philosophy before he got to me was, I used the military philosophy of, you move the person once. If the problem persists where they go, it's the person. If the problem doesn't persist where you put them, the problem was a supervision. So I gave the individual the opportunity to prove himself. He failed. We were getting, like you said, single women being stopped, things of that nature. But what really triggered it was when you start documenting on them, then they tailspin into, well, it's never my fault. So this particular officer was in processing a prisoner, at which time he takes his gun out, because you know when you in process a prisoner, you have to secure your weapon because you're going to the holding facility. He takes the weapon out and looks down the barrel of his weapon, and it's on camera. So it's reported to me. I call internal affairs. I said, he's done. I want him done. I had all his training records. We gave him time after time, observation periods. Dealing with labor contracts, you must have copious notes if you seek to dismiss an officer. We had all of that in place. But then what we had was the video of him looking down the barrel of his own gun. You never know. His partner could have thought he was maybe going to shoot him or just go off on a tangent because he was already in a tailspin. This is an issue where I had to address it. He was dismissed from the department. The end result was we now have to get a grasp on mental health for our officers. These young people, super intelligent, degrees, multiple degrees. However, there are some of them super smart but super sensitive. Pressure being applied. They're never taught about the pressures of this job. What they're going to see on a continuum, especially in Atlantic City. Shooting after shooting, bodies laying in the street, motor vehicle accident where people are dismembered, all of that. So we had to address this particular situation, and we even sent them for mental health evaluation. But that wasn't the issue. The issue was he never really wanted to be a police officer from the start. His parents made him become a police officer because they felt as though you would keep the lineage going, or in my community, because he wasn't American, he was forced into a situation which was detrimental to him.
Thank you. Please indicate your response. Mr. Clowser.
So, as deputy chief, for Norristown, I was involved in the termination of a couple officers. However, I'll go back to when I was a patrol sergeant here in Norristown. We had an officer who I guess you could say, wasn't the most helpful. And it was, there was, things were growing, you know, as, you know, officers, we don't tell on each other. It's kind of, you know, what you know, we don't want. But the thing is we have to have accountability, right? So one of the things, if somebody else is putting somebody at risk, we need to know about it. And so, you know, there's this thing called duty to intervene. Well, I look at duty to intervene as not just applying the use of force, but everything that we do. If somebody's, you know, starting to get fired up, you know, with somebody, you know, that they're dealing with in the community, there needs to be, that officer needs to be willing to step up and calm that person down. If they're making a bad decision, pull them away, you know, and this, that. So in this situation, though, the officers were speaking up, right? Because they realized that this person was going to get somebody hurt. So, you know, as the sergeant, you know, again, we talk about documentation and everything. You know, I had to document it. We had to go through some progressive discipline, some corrective action, some training in order to try to get this officer to change his ways or kind of be a little bit, you know, step it up a little bit or correct whatever he had, the issues that he had through training. So again, the officers were willing to, hey, let me know what's going on. And they were willing to let me know as the sergeant, you know, because they trusted me. We had a good relationship. Yeah, he's not getting it. And, you know, this is long before body-worn cameras. So, you know, we needed the officers to tell us what was going on. Eventually, we had enough to, you know, approach the chief, you know, well, our lieutenants. I mean, everybody in the chain of command was made aware of what was going on. And they were dealing with it progressively. Again, we have to do progressive discipline. We can't just, you know, fire somebody unless it's something egregious, illegal, or immoral. In this case, it wasn't. It was just this officer just wasn't performing the way we expected them to perform. And again, that's another thing is people need to understand what the expectations are, so we can hold them accountable for those expectations. In the long run, we ended up terminating this officer. The department was better off for it, but the thing that impressed me the most was the officers under my command at that time were willing to come to me with that problem and let me know. And as deputy chief, I had that same thing. People were willing to come to me and let me know when there was something wrong and needed to be corrected so we could hold people accountable.
Thank you. Please indicate your response. Our next question. Please share an example of a high-profile or critical incident where you had, such as a use of force situation or public safety emergency, where you had to communicate with the public. How did you manage the communication and maintain transparency, and what was the outcome? I'll read that again. Please share an example of a high-profile or critical incident, such as a use of force situation or public safety emergency, where you had to communicate with the public. How did you manage the communication and maintain transparency, and what was the outcome? Mr. Trail.
I've had a few, but most recently, we had a very tragic event in Lansdale Borough about a week ago. Two young men, both juveniles, were operating a vehicle early in the morning hours and at a high rate of speed, and they crashed into a tanker car in downtown Lansdale. Much like Norristown, Lansdale has a lot of freight trains and a lot of tankers. It actually derailed one of these tanker cars, which was filled with hazardous material. I arrived on scene shortly about 3 a.m. To help coordinate the response. And again, working through partnership with our emergency management, our fire, our EMS, we were able to triage the incident right away. That's when it became apparent that this tanker car was filled with hazardous material and it was partially derailed. And I think each one of us can recall the East Palestine, Ohio event where there was a massive tanker fire. It quickly sparked concern in our community. Fortunately, because we have been training for this event and we're holding regular tabletop exercises, which is extremely important. We hold them probably quarterly in our organization. All of our people are trained in the NIMS model and the incident command system. So all of them have training on basic command and control with critical incidents. So for this incident, again, this is just fresh in my mind because it happened last week. We were able to quickly form up our EOC. We were to get our stakeholders in there. And the next thing we need to do is get out with our PIO, public social media, local news, messaging on what was going on. And we had that probably up and running by about 4:30 in the morning. We had our EOC open. We had our people engaged in reviewing what was going on. We had SEPT on scene. We had all different stakeholders trying to get us real information to give to our community because it did spark a lot of public concern. And that comes through building partnerships early on. I spoke earlier today about how you have to develop your organization to respond to the challenges. One of the biggest things we have to understand is, like my colleagues have said, we have a lot of young people come into this profession. They don't have a lot of life experience, and the profession has become much more difficult today than it has ever been. And we have been fortunate that we have not had an officer-involved shooting in Lansdale, but it can happen anywhere at a time. We've had a lot in this county. And we learn from those incidents. We have worked with our police officers when these incidents happen to document it, to triage it, to do an after-action review of everything and all of our critical incidents so we can learn from that, so we can be better prepared. There are a lot of dangers in this community. Not all of them are at the hand of a gun or a knife. There's civil unrest, there's fire, there's all these critical incidents. And when those things happen, your police department, your fire department, and your emergency management need to come together and work as a team. And we need to get information out to the public. Much like we did during the pandemic, when my community was paralyzed with fear. The first thing I did was get on social media, put a letter out to our community, told them what the police department was going to do, what you could expect from them, and we kept an open line of communication, which is really important.
Thank you. Please indicate your response. Mr. Benjamin.
Yes. Well, the incident I'm going to speak about, I had to yield the public notification portion to the mayor's office. I was a newly decorated juvenile detective, and I responded to a housing project where a 4-year-old fell out the window. It was pretty engaging, given that the juvenile was the same age as my child. But I had to stay focused. I had to do the investigation, and during the course of the investigation, I had to interview the property manager. And when I sat in the property manager's office on the first floor, they had armed guards outside, but they had 9 windows with 18 juvenile restraints in the window. And me being the person that I am, I'm like, wait a minute. I won't say the man's name, but I remember his name vividly. I said, let me ask you one question before I conclude the interview. What are these restraints for? He said, well, they're child restraints. I said, let me ask you a question. There was no child restraints in the apartment upstairs on the 4th floor when a juvenile fell out the window. Why is that? Well, we charge a $100 restraint. I said, well, what is the cost? He said, like $19.99. I said, but the institution is charging each resident $100 to put them in the window. I said, what if they can't afford it? Is there some type of payment plan that you added to their rent? He says, no, they just, let's do what the property manager says. So when I wrote it all up, went to my commanding officer, went to the chief, the mayor's office, got wind of it, and Governor Corzine at the time was running for re-election or running for governor. He came to Atlantic City. Guess where? The first place he stopped? At that housing project where that young child fell. My investigation caused the state of New Jersey's governing body to initiate a law that those child restraints must be on every floor above the 1st floor at no cost to the resident. So that is one of the things when we talk about pressure. That was a pressure situation for me. And they wanted me to speak publicly, but the powers that be was like, no, we got it. We'll use his paperwork and we'll make the necessary notification to the public because, again, the public was in an uproar. I mean, the building was unsafe. Now everything began to come out once the governor walked through the building. All the safety hazards began to light, and you can imagine what pressure that is on a young investigating officer. What are you doing, man? You ain't, I'm doing my job. My integrity says I'm doing my job, and that's what led to the situation. So that's why I encourage a lot of young officers, stand your ground, be honest, be truthful. Let the evidence take it where it goes.
Thank you. Please record your response. Mr. Clowser.
So there's been a few critical incidents during my tenure as deputy chief for Norristown. I was actually, the chief was away, and we actually had a officer-involved shooting while he was away, so I was in charge. And with those, in Montgomery County, those incidents are automatically taken over by the district attorney's office, investigated by the district attorney's office, and the press releases go out from the district attorney's office. Any type of homicide investigation in Norristown, same thing. You know, we're kind of limited as a department of what we release because the district attorney's office, as the head law enforcement agency in the county, takes over those investigations. But I'll switch gears to another, major event that impacted Norristown that I was in charge of coordinating for, and that was the papal visit. And one of the things we looked at during the papal visit was parking. Where's everybody going to park? Because we all know in Norristown, there's not much parking, right? We always have an issue with parking. And so I had to make sure that we had a plan for security for those that were going to be at the transportation center to get to Philadelphia for the papal visit. And again, you're talking about mass crowds. How do you secure that? We had to plan for that. But then communicate to the public, hey, when you're coming into Norristown, this is where you can park. This is where you can be. We actually I went on on TV about it, put out maps about it. We had press conferences about it to make sure that things in Norristown were not disrupted by something that wasn't really occurring in Norristown. It was occurring in Philadelphia. But we had to make sure that the public knew what was going on. So I had to take that on. I had to communicate. I had to coordinate with a lot of different agencies in order to do that. It may not seem like a huge thing, but to us it was, right? We always want to plan out these critical events whenever we can. We want to have a plan. We want to train for them. We want to rehearse what we're going to do. And that's kind of what we do, with the other departments within the municipality, the fire department, codes, public works. We all have to come together whenever there's a critical event, and understand what each role is for us and who's going to be in charge. And, there's been multiple occasions where we stood up the EOC for weather-related events, when power's been out throughout, the municipality, when we've had snow emergencies. We stand up the EOC to make sure that, the public, we're getting the word out to the public to make sure they understand what we're doing to get things moving again in Norristown.
Thank you. Please record your response. All right, friends, last question. You'll have 2 minutes to respond to this. What is your vision for community policing in Norristown? And how would you build a department that reflects the values and needs of this community?
Well, my vision is to bring the police and the public together. Right now, there's a dire need for staffing in your community right now. You don't have enough police. You're down from a high of 69 or 68, if I believe, somewhere in the mid-50s. We cannot deliver adequate police services. We cannot create a culture of problem solving if our police officers are running from call to call to call. We need to end this cycle of respond, report, repeat. Our officers need to be in community engagement. And the vision for me is, first we need to get in, roll up our sleeves, work on recruiting. We need to then begin a community survey. And I've talked about this already ad nauseum, and I'll continue to. We have to do a survey. We need to understand what the needs are in the different wards, what the perception of crime. We can lower crime to nothing. But if residents and people who want to come to this town fear it because they have a feeling, which is an emotion-based response, they're going to fear crime, no matter what the numbers are. So we need to engage the community and make sure that they understand we're working in partnership to reduce crime, but also reduce the fear of crime. There's no reason people shouldn't be able to walk these streets at night in Norristown and not be fearful of being subjected to violent crime. But that takes a holistic approach. The values that I will bring here is mentorship, coaching, and development of your police officers. I told you in my early onset, I'm a huge person who believes in self-improvement. I work very hard every day, I journal every day, I physically run every morning. Matter of fact, I ran this morning, I'm cramping up here just sitting here. But the vision is bringing the community and the police department together. We did it in Lansdale. I look at your social media page, they have a nice social media page, and I was looking at it the other day, there's about 35,000 people in Lansdale, give or take, or strike that, in Norristown, my apologies. There's about 14,000 people who are on your social media page, and you have a 66% approval rating. Lansdale's, we have 21,000 people. There's 18,000 people on our social media page, and we have a 90% approval rating. I intend to bring the principles of fairness, trust, and transparency and leadership to this police department. The way we treat our men and women in uniform is a direct correlation to the way they will treat the community. If we treat them right, we'll treat the community right. And together, we will reduce the fear of crime and improve the economic opportunities this community desperately needs.
Thank you. Mr. Benjamin?
Okay, my vision for the Norristown Police Department, if I'm chosen to lead the Norristown Police Department, during this interview process, we heard some things that could be alarming if they're not taken care of immediately. Internal cry for new leadership, external cry for new leadership. So my vision would be of community policing as a culturally competent, culturally competent, constitutionally led, service-oriented police department that's responsive and not responsive, but proactive with the community's help. Because the eyes and ears of the community is our information as law enforcement officers. Yeah, we have units that specialize in long-term investigations and things like that, but it comes from the information from the community. So what I'm hearing personally is there's some type of disconnect, is why we three are sitting here vying for this position. I'm a straight shooter. I'm not coming to play games. These young men and women are grown and they're carrying guns and badges. It's a heavy responsibility to service a community that you have a disconnection with. One, it's unsafe. One, it's mentally taxing on the officer and on the community, because if they don't trust you, they're not going to call you, which means the violence continues, the addiction and car theft continues. Because guess what? They're sitting on the information we need. We know who these kids are that's still in these cars, but guess what? If I can't walk up to an officer and say, "How you doing?" without getting a scowl, or even find an officer patrolling, and let me be frank, when I applied for this job, I've been in Norristown almost every day since I applied for this job. And I have not seen a continuous patrol of officers. Now, and my colleague says we're low in manpower. Guess what? That's when I put the shirt on, despite being the chief, and I'm coming out there and I'm serving. If I can do it, I can ask you to do it. That's my vision of community policing. I protect, I serve. I'm a man of service. We are men of service. Take nothing, anything from us. But this town is my town.
Thank you. Please indicate your response. Mr. Clowser.
28 years here in Norristown. The last 8 as deputy chief. We had a strategic plan. That strategic plan improved the safety in Norristown by reducing violent crime by over 45% and overall crime by over 50%. That means 200 less people per year being victimized. I know that plan. We operated under a plan that worked. I know what works for Norristown. Community service or community relations, I know, yes, we have to build community relations. Every officer has to be out there doing what they need to do. That strategic plan is the framework on how we make Norristown safe. Again, I operated under that plan. I have more knowledge about what we did in those 8 years to get us to be a safer community, a more productive police department. You know, the past 2, 3 years, 4 years really, Norristown experimented with bringing in people that didn't know how to police Norristown. They may have known how to police, but they don't know how to police Norristown. And it destroyed the department. Yes, we're down 12 to 15 officers. That needs to be a priority to get officers back on the street. They're burnt out. That's why you don't see them. They're burnt out and they have no direction. We're going to give them direction. I'm going to give them direction if I'm brought back as chief of police. Again, I've done it. I've proven that I can reduce crime, build public trust, engage with the community in a positive way. And we made Norristown safer. Let me do it again. Let me come back and bring back the things that we were doing 4 years ago to make this community safer. Those officers, you know why they don't want me back? Because they know they're going to have to work harder. We're going back to a police department that's going to be held accountable. They're going to have to work their asses off. And they're afraid of that. They're afraid of me coming back. So you need to understand that. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Don't leave yet. All right, we have some final instructions for you. So before we close out, there are 3 final survey questions for you. Please answer one question for each candidate. The questions ask whether, based on what you heard, you believe the candidate would lead with community trust and engagement, accountability and transparency, and cultural competence and fairness. Let's begin with Mr. Trail. Take a few moments to consider and submit your response. So you're going to submit a response. You're just going to answer the questions that come up on Slido. This is just for the first candidate. Yep. This is just for Mr. Trail. Okay? All good? Need a second? Okay. Okay. Now, answer the question for Mr. Benjamin. Okay. And now, answer the question for Mr. Clowser. All right, friends. Thank you so much for attending and contributing to this important process. Your presence reflects the strength and commitment of the Norristown community. To our candidates, thank you for sharing your experiences, your vision, and your time with us. We appreciate your thoughtful responses and your willingness to engage directly with the residents of Norristown. Community voices are very important to this process. We thank you for taking out the time. We thank you for being patient, for dealing with my foibles as I decided to stand up in the middle of it. We thank you for coming out. It shows your true commitment to this municipality.